Okay, the last part, my last learning objective for point slope form is identifying the parts of point slope. And that can be really difficult. Everything stems to y minus y's of 1 equals your slope times x minus x of 1. Everything stems from that equation. Notice that if it turns to plus, that's not the formula. The formula is minus y's of 1. So if it turned to plus, that means your x or your y had to be negative. Remember, x of 1 and y's of 1 is your original point, and n is your slope. If it turned all of a sudden to y plus 3 equals 2 times x minus 4, well, that's not the formula. The formula is y minus y's of 1. So if it turned to plus, then that tells me that whatever the x or y is negative. So it's kind of opposite when you're identifying points, because the formula is minus. So you have to remember that the formula is minus. And if it's minus, for example, y minus 2 equals 3 times x minus 1, well, that is the formula, minus and minus. So if it's a minus sign, then that means that the value is positive. It's normal. If it turns to plus, that means whatever your x or y was negative. This is very abstract, and a lot of kids have a hard time identifying if the x point is positive or negative, x or y. My learning objective for you today is to identify slope of a line and identify the point that it goes through. That's my learning objective. So I mean, it's the same as we did in 5.3 when we were given slope-intercept form, except this is way more advanced. Slope isn't too bad. Most kids know it's whatever's in front of the parenthesis. It's the x and y point that gets a little bit more difficult. So what's the slope of this line? Y minus 2 equals 1/4 times x minus 2. What's my slope? 1/4. Not 1/4 x, just 1/4. My slope is whatever is in front of the parenthesis. Now I have to identify my point. And there's two spots for mistakes here. Kids think x is first, so they think x. They think that if it's minus, then it should be negative. That it's flipped with point slope form. My x value is right here. Since it's minus, that means it is positive. My y value, it's still the same formula that it's supposed to be, so that tells me my y value is positive as well. The reason why I want to show you this is sometimes, remember that fraction one we did yesterday? If you get something like this, y equals 3/5 x plus 7/8, that's really hard to graph. It's really difficult to graph. What happens, there's so many mistakes to be able to translate it to slope-intercept, so it's easier to graph things like this from point slope. So what you can do here, let me just draw 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So I know that it goes through 2, 2, and then I know that my slope is up 1/4. Up 1/4 would be somewhere around there. Down 1/4. So my graph would, keep in mind it's not scaled obviously, it looks really messy. But it's really easy to graph from point slope, because you pull the point out, you draw the dot at the point, and then you use the slope to find other points. Okay, next one. I want to identify my slope, and I want to identify the point that this line goes through. Okay, so my slope is whatever's in front of the parenthesis. What's in front of the parenthesis? Yep, -2. And now I have to remember that my formula looks like this. That's what my formula looks like. If anything turns to plus, that means the value is negative. So this turned to plus, so that means my y is negative. So that would be a -3 that it goes through on the y. And my x still looks like the formula, so my x is going to be positive. So, I mean, point slope is just all mixed up, and that's where the mistakes can come from. Now you can easily graph this from point slope, especially if you don't really love getting y by itself. And if you're given a graph in point slope, you can easily graph that. Okay, so let me go ahead and graph this thing. I go through the point 2, -3, and my slope is -2, down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1, or up 2 over 1. And my graph would look something like that. Again, I don't usually graph in point slope unless it's something that I know I'm going to get some kind of fraction as my y-intercept. Then it's going to turn into a mess and it will be really hard to graph that, okay? And I know that it would be hard to, like, some kids forget how to add fractions, multiply fractions, that kind of stuff. So today what you're going to do, you're going to identify points today. You're going to write in point slope form, and you're going to graph from point slope form. That's your target. This is the last thing you're going to do. So how you do it, you plot the point like I showed you on the previous page, and then you just use your slope to find different points on the graph. So we don't even care about the y-intercept here. We just care about, hey, what point is there, and then use the slope. And we have to remember that this is what the formula is. We can't change the formula. It's been around since the beginning. Okay, so the formula has to look like this. If it's not minus, that tells me that the x or y value was positive. So I'm going to identify my slope. And I'm going to identify, not y-edge, oopsie, I mean my point. Okay, so what's my slope of this line? Yep, my slope is -2. Hey, is this the same graph as the previous page? And what is my point? Well, remember it's supposed to be minus, so I just always keep that in mind. My x is that second one. It turned to plus, so that tells me my x is negative. My y value is still minus, so that tells me my y is positive.
All right.
So you plot your point, that's step 1, -2, 3. Whoops, +3. Can you see your grids on your graph? And then I use my slope, down 2 over 1, down 2 over, down 2 over, and down 2 and over. Connect. And don't forget to put your arrows.
All right. Okay.
I hope you just make sure that today's worksheet is actually kind of short, but make sure you just take your time for a second and ask yourself, should my x be positive? Should my y be positive? Should it be a negative? So you always should have that at the front of your mind.
All right.
Okay, just trying to extend my page, no problem, but it's not letting me. Okay, next one. I want to graph this line, and I don't want to get y alone because I see a fraction I'd have to distribute, and I feel like I would get really stressed out over distributing that fraction. So I can graph it right from here. I can identify the slope, and I can identify the point that it goes through. Always keeping in mind that the real formula, you can't change the formula, the real formula is minus sign. So if it turned into a plus, that means my value was negative. Okay, my slope, what's in front of the parenthesis, 1/3. My point, remember x is that second one, and a lot of people are going to put x as this -2, but it's not. So my point, this is my x value, it's still minus, so I know it's a +3 that that it goes through. My y, and it turned to plus when it's supposed to be minus, so I know that this is a negative 2. And then you plot that. 1, 2, 3, negative 2. There's my point. And now I use my slope to continue the line. Up 1 over 3. Up 1 over 3. Up 1 over 3. I feel like my graph is weird, but anyways, there is the graph. Okay, I'm assuming that y-intercept is not a perfect point. That's another reason why we don't, we like to graph right from point slope.